Welcome to Confessions of an EOS Implementer, a podcast by Talent Harbor. We share unique stories of EOS implementers and the companies they've transformed to give you a rare glimpse into the successes and the challenges of the system in action. I'm your host, Ryan Hogan. Let's jump in.
So when we chatted about this a few weeks ago, I think I shared with you that really, if I really think hard about what drives me, what my true passion is, what I see as my unique ability, to use a Dan Sullivan term, is to help people become the best version of themselves. Like that is just, I never had mentoring. And by the time I finally got it, I was pretty old. And I think, man, what a difference this would have made in my life when I was so much younger. So I'm just really passionate about helping people understand there's a different path forward for you. EOS is just my vehicle to help people become the best versions of themselves. So to your point about leadership transformation, that is where all the fun is. It's in the people. The business being great is the byproduct for me.
And when did you actually discover this? Because you said it was later in life, and what was it where that light bulb actually went off?
Just doing a lot of work on me, right? Tackling those saboteurs of the imposter syndrome that so many of us, I think in particular women, have. It would have been well into my late 40s and early 50s, and just in reading and learning and being part of other coaching programs, you just start to sort of have those little ahas, especially if you're super honest with yourself about what's really driving you, about what's really motivating you, and more importantly, almost what's not. What are you doing because you feel like society thinks that you should do this, or because you've always been told this is what's important or this is what you should do versus what's really important to you? And it takes time, I think, for us to get to the place where we can be honest with ourselves and then eventually, hopefully, be honest with people outside of ourselves.
And how does that discovery take place for someone that's like lost right now or trying to figure out what their purpose is? Is this just deep contemplation and soul searching?
Yes. Journaling, reflecting, reading, talking to a coach, whether they're professional or not. Anybody can be a coach. Anybody that's really just willing to listen and just be curious and ask questions is going to help you get to those discoveries a little bit on your own, I think. As I reflect back even over my whole life, I realized I am also a person that people have come to since I was a young person for advice. Not so much for coaching. We might think of it as coaching, but let's be fair, it was really advice giving. So that is a skill, if that can be considered a skill, that I've had, and that, quite frankly, I've had to unlearn in order to be a better coach, because great coaching is not about giving advice. So that doesn't mean we never have an opportunity for advice giving. But it's, some of us are just great at discerning through a myriad of things, maybe what the best course of action is, even if we don't really fully understand your problem. And that's just a skill that I didn't realize was a skill, because like all things, when something is just natural and easy for you, you don't think there's anything special in that thing. So that little piece of me was always there, but then really understanding how that's not going to help anybody become the best version of themselves. Just giving advice maybe helps them to make a decision for the short term for themselves, but it doesn't then, it's that whole teaching somebody to fish versus just giving them the fish. I was just doling out fish right and left and not really teaching people how to get that themselves. And so I'm so much more intentional. And that was hard because that was an ego slap for me, Ryan. I'm all, well, what do you, of course my idea, you think your ideas are awesome and you're having all this impact and people are sharing with you how impactful those ideas and those thoughts and those decisions and directions that you're sending people in, and how valuable that information has been for them. So when you are constantly rewarded for that behavior, it's a much harder behavior to then backpedal and realize, if I'm really going to help people become their best, I have to allow them to grow into that space and figure out how to do this for themselves. And so that has been this journey now for the last probably 10 years, especially the last 5, that I've become really intentional about.
So and it's hard, right? Because when you see someone going down the wrong path, or like you've been there, you've done that, and you're like, I know where you're going right now, and I just want to help. How do you reconcile that? Like, how do you get folks back on the right path? Or if that like there's a little bit of detour needed, like how do you balance that or help them get to where they're going without the advice?
It's really popping the myth that if we don't give them the answer, they're going to fail. Talk about ego. right? Really what we're saying, Ryan, is we don't think you're whatever enough, smart enough, creative enough, well, put in the word there, enough to do this on your own or figure this out. If we really get honest with ourselves, that's what we're thinking. And that's why we feel the need to tell them. And when you let that sink in, it's pretty unsettling, because I don't think any of us would openly admit that we don't think other people are capable enough, have the right knowledge, are smart enough, or creative enough, or influencing it, whatever that might be, whatever enough, that they're not enough. That if we don't swoop in and help them, that they're just not going to make it.
Interesting.
That's pretty humbling to think about.
Because it's like the way that you're presenting, like it's more, it's been more about us than it is the person that we're giving advice to. It's about our self-gratification or us like already knowing the path. And it's not about actually letting them have the journey on their own.
Correct. And that's a little bit, it makes me nervous even right now sitting here and saying it, because this is a pretty new discovery for me, a pretty new lens to look at this through. But I find it to be pretty undeniable, no matter how many ways I try to rationalize it differently in my head. If I am really being honest, and I think all of us as humans, if we're really being honest, that secretly is what we're thinking. And it does fuel our own egos.
That's super interesting. And you brought this notion up of a planner, like as this transformation and as a coach and helping people understand what are some other things or the planner that you see as a part of this transformation process for leaders?
I think that for leaders to really transform, this is really at the heart of that. And I'm really just putting this together as you and I are sitting here and having this conversation and connecting these dots, which is really pretty fascinating. It's like having a clarity break with you here, Ryan, in that in order for leaders to really be transformative, they have to understand what their real role is. And their real role is to grow and transform and help build other leaders. They cannot do that if they are just advice mongers. And if they're just making themselves feel important and powerful by being the answer to everyone's woes. And again, that goes back to then what I know I felt this way when I was running my company. I thought, well, geez, if I'm helping other people to be solving all these answers and I'm not the answer person anymore, what's my value? What's my worth? Your value is in creating that self-propelling team and perpetuating group of leaders that they can all do that and then take that to the next level and grow those people to help them be independent, competent, and confidence, right? Ridden leaders that we all need so much more of in our businesses and in our communities. And this isn't even just about business. This falls into parenting. This falls into teaching. It falls into just about everywhere. And you think about how we as parents in every generation, this seems to be amplified, so afraid to let anybody fail, so afraid to let anybody figure anything out. I'm old enough. I can remember, like, we were just cut loose. There were no phones. People couldn't track you down. If you got hurt, you got hurt. I broke my arm on the school playground once on this machine or this cool device called a witch's hat that doesn't exist anymore because we've got to protect everyone. And, we didn't sue the school, and that was my fault. So it's this, we become this very protective. We just don't want people to fail. And then we rob them of those opportunities to see how great they really are and how resilient they really are.
And actually how you just ended that resilient, it's really interesting when you bring the kids into it. I have 4 kids of my own, and I feel like I do more preaching and more guiding and than allowing them to figure things out on their own. But that resilience piece is so incredibly important, and you only build resilience. Again, this is a Ryan Hogan opinion. This is not a firm fact. But you build resilience through failure, through adversity. And if you constantly have all of the right answers, or you're giving your kids or your team or everybody all of the answers, and let's be clear, like as a leader, we probably don't have all the right answers, but we believe we do. But like we're robbing them of those wins, of those growths, and also of those failures in which resiliency and practical lessons are learned.
Right. We don't learn anything from our successes, Ryan. Right. We only really learn from our failures. So you have to create a culture of embracing failure as an opportunity for growth. And we don't teach that in schools, unfortunately. If we could do a better job of actually flipping the script on that failing is just an opportunity to learn. I have a good friend who is an implementer like myself, and part of their family dinner discussion, they have young children. Every single night is, hey, where did you fail today? And if nobody has something to say, even the littlest of kids and the parents are involved, they all share, something they screwed up in that day. And if somebody doesn't have anything, oh gosh, that's too bad. I hope you get a chance for that tomorrow. Right? They are instilling they've got 3 and 4, they've got an infant. So these are little kids. And they are instilling this mindset of that growth mindset, to quote Carol Dweck, right? Like the growth mindset is just seeing failure as an opportunity to learn something. It's not a setback, right? It's only a failure if you learned nothing and you're wallowing around in your self-pity. So learning how to fail fast forward, right? I think is a huge opportunity for all of us.
So the question that begs, and this is something that as you're sitting here saying this, like, this is something that I struggle with, of like the grading criteria, like how much failing is too much, and like where do we measure and how do we judge this? So like, let me give you for instance, for our kids, for instance, when they go to school and they have a failure, that could come back in the form of a grade. And so they didn't do well on a test, or they turned something in late. And these are things that I think about should be kind of instilled. Like you kind of need to get good grades because that's what our society has dictated as a form of success and continuing to go through. And you should turn things up on time because there's a certain kind of personal accountability in all this. So on the kids side, there are, I agree 100%. Like we lost soccer games. We did a whole bunch of things in which like we had to overcome, and that adversity was faced. In the business world, we have similar things. And so when you think about EOS, we have the accountability chart, and we have the things that seat is accountable for. We have the scorecard and all of the measurables that are in the scorecards. And how do we build cultures of accountability while at the same time allowing grace? Like where is that line drawn?
So to me, is there learning that's happening? So even going back to the simplicity of the childhood of failing a test, how could we turn that into a learning opportunity instead of a just you failed and that's terrible and now we move on? What would be an option there, Ryan?
We come back, we review all the wrong answers, and then we retake. Yeah.
We give them an opportunity to fix it, right? And showing them that the work is in the effort, the reward is in the effort. We have to start rewarding effort, right, over just innate abilities, or people will be locked into thinking they're either smart or they're dumb, and not understanding that their brain is really elastic and you can actually get smarter. You can learn more things. But if we start praising only the ability over the effort, we create that fixed mindset in people starting at a very, very young age. I know that's what I had. I was a quote unquote gifted student. My ability was praised over and over and over again. Oh, you're so smart. Oh, you're so smart. Oh, you're so smart. Never was my effort praised. So then you become attached to that and you won't do anything to put it at risk, which means you won't even take a risk. You won't take on a project you don't think you can't 100% succeed at because your whole identity is wrapped up in this, you're so smart, or you're so gifted, or you're so whatever. And so we breed that into our kids. We breed that into our people at work. And then we wonder why we don't get people to really step up and lean in. So when I talk about embracing failure, people should be able to, in the workplace, be applauded for taking on a big risk, for taking on a challenge that was maybe a step above where they're at right now. And then figuring out what went really well and what didn't go really well. Even just sitting in your role, I'm not in any way advocating that we allow people to miss their scorecard measurables week in and week out, or continually not hit 80% of their rocks. Those are conversations we need to sit down and find out where they're struggling. What do they need help with? Get their impact. What was the miss here? What are you going to learn from this? What are we going to see in the future? And of course, if people never then level up and meet those expectations, then they're probably not in the right seat. They probably are working well outside of where they are currently at, whether that's in skill and ability or in desire. Maybe they don't really want the work that they're doing. There's all kinds of reasons why people don't succeed the way we need them to succeed. Would never advocate not expecting excellence. We should expect excellence, but we should allow people to fail forward and learn from that and get better.
That's awesome. These sound bites, by the way, are going to be incredible. Because it sounds like progression. Like you're looking if we're staying at the same level, so we're failing, but we're not making adjustments and we're not iterating and we're not improving, like that's where the red flag is not in the failure. The red flag is not in missing a rock or failing to meet your measurable for an L10 or failing a test. The measurable is really in the progress and what happens after that moment.
And the taking ownership and just saying, oh gosh, yeah, I didn't get that yet. And not blaming outside forces. I didn't get enough sleep last night. Let's quit all the BS excuses. And instead, if we just take ownership of everything, good, bad, and ugly in our lives, that puts us in the driver's seat of everything. And that is both exhilarating and terrifying. And when I first came to that realization, Ryan, you asked me earlier, kind of what was my turning point. I grew up with a victim mindset because that's what my mother had and still has. So, it's this, I'm just a leaf on the pond. I don't really get to control my own destiny. The world is just happening around me and I just get what I get. If it wasn't for bad luck, I'd have no luck at all. These are just the sorts of things that I grew up with. And so I had that mentality for such a long time. And when I finally, through some other mentoring, people that I pay attention to, like the Darren Hardys of the world, I've got a lot of places where I get my own coaching, came to the realization that, holy shit, I actually own my own destiny. That's awesome. And also pretty terrifying, right? That means that I get to be fully accountable and responsible for all the good, the bad, the ugly that goes on in my life. But what a great place to be. So much better than feeling like I'm a pawn.
Yes. I like to think about this as like unplugging from the matrix. You and I actually have very similar stories, other than the gifted and talented. Mine, I barely got through high school. I joined the Navy initially because it was that or a different, much rougher path. But the Navy had changed me. It turned a light bulb on, and it's really where I started to understand that truly the world is our oyster, and we can be or do anything that we set our mind to. And it's something that my dad would preach to me growing up. But you have to prove it to yourself. And for me, it was, the world's out to get me up until I was about 21 or 22. And then something popped and I was like, oh, that's a data point now where I was able to accomplish that. And then another thing and then another thing. And as you do these things and they accumulate, it's like unplugging from the matrix, and you can see life in a whole different kind of way. What were some of your validating moments as you're coming through? What were these instances that you were proving these things to yourself and you're like, this is it?
It really all started when I came in. I owe a lot of this to the visionary business owner at Orchard Corset, who was kind of my real first mentor, right? And he had that faith and belief in me. Sometimes, we have to borrow that from other people before we have it in ourselves. And he had so much of it for me that it allowed me to kind of soak some of that in. And then you just start having those wins, right? Success is what actually builds confidence. And then when I started to really dig into that whole mindset thing and about, I get to control my own destiny, I really did just take control of that. It's funny, I started running my life on EOS, Ryan, probably 8 or 9 years ago. And the proof is in the pudding right there. My 3-year pictures come to reality, right? My annual, by and large, everything I've set out to do, I've done. And when it hasn't happened, I'm okay with that also. Being accountable for your own destiny doesn't mean that you control or should ignore outside forces. Things happen to us that we don't have any control over. What we control is, what are we going to do with this now that it's here? And that is where I think that we really take back our own control. One of my favorite little lessons, we talk about these little nuggets that we learn that really sync with us, was something I read in a book called Linchpin by Seth Godin. And he shares this great story. And if we do it, where are we at on time? Because I love this story. Perfect. So he shares a story that happened a long, long time ago on the Virgin Islands. And there's a group of people, there was only one flight in and one flight out a day for the U.S. Virgin Islands. And this group of people was looking to get back, but there was mechanical failure on the plane and the plane wasn't going to go. And people are acting like they always do at airports when things don't go their way. They're crying, they're freaking out, they're yelling at the person running the counter who has no control over the fact that the plane's not going to fly. It's just not going to fly. So crying and bitching and complaining isn't going to help. Well, one person, instead of doing all of that, walks over to where they can charter flights and charters a flight that he can't afford at that moment in his life, and then proceeds to borrow their little whiteboard or whatever and start selling seats on that flight back, right? That person is Richard Branson, probably what planted his seed for Virgin Atlantic Airways, right? Way back in the day. But the lesson that Seth was helping us understand was this concept called prajna, which is I'm probably going to get this wrong, but I want to say it's a Hindu concept of wisdom. And it's things just are what they are. And really what it comes down to, don't be emotionally attached to the outcome that you wanted. When you are emotionally attached to an outcome and it doesn't happen, we freeze and we don't think. That's what happens at airports all the time. We freeze. And then then our mind narrows in and we no longer can look and see other opportunities and pathways for us to move forward. I use that, Ryan, over and over, and especially when I'm traveling, and I travel a lot. And the moment I think a flight might make it or something, I'm like, Richard Branson, that's all I've got to say. And I thought, all right, so that's not going to happen. Let's take a look at some other things. Getting upset is not going to solve the issue. It's only going to make things worse. And it has given me, I rarely get riled up or anxious or upset. And the moment I do, I catch myself there and I just bring it back down to what's inside my look. What can I control here? And let's just focus on that. It's a waste of my time and energy. So you just almost never see me getting bent out of shape over anything anymore for probably the last 5 or 6 years. It's unnerving to a lot of people.
I love it. I wish I could say the same because most recently I had an airline trip that just went completely sideways on me. However, I've had usually I am. And there's so many times that I've been flying from Baltimore to Seattle during the winter months, and I land in Chicago or land in Minneapolis, get stuck in the airport, and it's like, okay, cool. I'm gonna go get a hotel, and I'm gonna do the same work that I would have done in whichever destination. 100% agree with that. And also one of the things that you said that really resonated is sometimes it takes other people seeing things in us before we can see those things ourselves. And those people help us, bring us. And it's also it's a weird moment. Maybe those are some of the times that I have felt like imposter syndrome, because not that I'm thinking I don't believe in myself and I can't accomplish these things, but thinking to myself, what does this person see in me to be able to invest that time into me? Anyhow, really, really interesting points there. One of the things that I did want to talk about was you discovered this EOS thing. Was it in 2014? Where?
Yeah.
And what was it? What were you doing?
I'd come into this business, and I won't bore you with all the how I got there, but I ended up meeting this visionary business owner through a friend because he needed help. The business at the time was bleeding money every month. And there was only about 4 employees. It was an internet-based company. And when I got there, I had nothing to lose. I'm like, well, this is crazy. This is corsets. Who the hell would, I didn't even know that was a thing anymore. I didn't know anything about the type of business that this was. But the visionary owner and I were what we later learned a very classic visionary integrator duo, right? We just didn't know that, but we acted like one right out of the gate, which allowed that company to take off. Literally within the first 2 months I was there, we went from being in the black to being in the red, or vice versa, being in the red to being in the black, and moving forward pretty quickly. And then we really did start, the growth was crazy. My teaching background ended up coming in handy. I just started creating content, these Corset 101 videos, because I got tired of answering these long-winded questions. I thought, man, if I could just put this in a blog. And then I would do the blogs. And I remember one customer saying, I can't understand things very well when I read them. And of course, I'm a background teacher. And I thought, you got to be kidding me. So I thought, well, let's put these blogs into video then, right? Let's just start doing that. And this is before you could pay for things on Facebook. There was no paid advertising on any social media. None of that existed. This is 2012, 2013. And so we just skyrocketed because anytime anybody did any kind of a search, everybody came to us. 0 paid dollars in advertising, and we were number 1 every single time on Google. So we really were growing, 100%, 1,000%. I mean, it was just so fast. We were hiring. And that is super exhilarating and a little bit intoxicating, but it's also pretty terrifying and chaotic. We suddenly have 30 employees in under 2 years from the 4 that we had. And trying to onboard all those people and the weight of being responsible for their livelihoods did not sit well with either of us. And so we were doing a lot of reading, everything by Jim Collins, everything by Patrick Lencioni. We're just reading everything we can, trying to get our arms around our business. And because the whole business was in my head, I just knew what to do somehow, or in Jeff's head. And so we were always having that hit by a bus conversation. If any of us gets hit by a bus, right, there's no business and nobody here has a job. It just disappears. And that's unsettling. And that is actually when Amazon recommended Traction to me based on my other reading, we think you might like this book. And this was at the very end of 2014. And I didn't even get through the first chapter before I knew right away. This actually took all of that other reading I had already done. I could see it all in there, and it put it together in this beautiful, this is the how. I tell people, all of those other authors tell you why you need to do things, and they tell you what you need to do. Gino tells us how. And so immediately, that was like, this is what we're doing. We are doing EOS here in this organization. And it was a life changer for us. We believe it saved us from imploding. It allowed that visionary owner to retire a lot sooner than he thought he would. It allowed me to really grow and ultimately exit that business to do, of course, what I do full time now. But in those early stages, in this small town of Wenatchee that I was living in, every business owner that would listen to me, like, I found the holy grail of how to run your business. Let me help you. Let me help you. So,
and so are you one of the few integrator implementers? Is that your trade, or where do you see yourself?
Actually, there's a lot of us now, and for a while I sat in both. Once he retired, I really was sort of both the visionary and the integrator. I can straddle those roles pretty well. I find actually I get bored doing too much of one and too much of the other. For anybody that knows anything about Colby, I'm all over the place there too. I'm an 8671. So I initiate both in quick start and in fact finding. And so there's, I just go wherever the wind is taking me at any given time. But really what I love to do is, as I said right at the beginning, is grow and develop people, because I felt like I missed that at the early part of my life. So what brings me the most joy is growing and developing people and watching them evolve. And EOS is such a great vehicle for that, because you're sitting there with this leadership team. And when I first start with a team, number one, it's usually not entirely the same team a year later. There's almost always some transition that happens there. But even with those that are still there from the beginning, they're so not the same people. You're just watching them become a group of people who are good at this one thing, but they're not working as a team. They're not thinking about the business as a whole. And you really, sometimes it's almost like a light bulb moment in the session where you really see them flip the script a little bit on themselves, and you see them rise up and they start contributing in other areas of the business. They start looking at things just so differently and thinking at such a higher level than what they were thinking even a year ago. And that, Ryan, is it is the most fun. It almost brings tears to my eyes when I'm in a session when I watch that happen.
That's incredible. And what do you think's key to that? Like, when you look at obviously leadership teams can transition, especially while you're adopting, but like, what are some keys to that team actually kind of surviving or that team being effective throughout that rollout?
That they really want it, number one. I think the biggest key is checking their egos and being coachable. If you're not coachable, this just isn't going to work. And I think the way that we can best do that as the coach is to be coachable, right? So that it goes back to what I've been working on with me, right, over the last several years to advise less, to ask better questions, and to share my own, be open, honest, and vulnerable with my own struggles in the session room, and help them to see, I'm not up here with all the answers. I'm growing and learning just like you are, and sharing times in my life where I have failed at that. Is, I think, a great way to let them see that I was once where you are. I once led the way you're trying to lead right now. I was you. And if I can get here, you can get here. It's helpful. I've watched people transform because of that.
And it sounds like vulnerability, a big piece of that. And what you have found is in these environments, like you first being vulnerable, you first sharing stories, helps kind of really kind of open up that team and understand like, oh, this is what we're doing here now.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And applauding them when they do. So I make a big deal in the session when somebody goes there or really is willing to share something that maybe they wouldn't have been willing to share before, because I've had a fearness of looking weak or not feeling, all of those things, all of that stupid stuff that goes on inside our brains, that's trying to protect us from looking foolish to the tribe. I applaud that, and I applaud that, and I applaud that. And I really try to get the leaders to be there to go first, because if the leader goes first, the rest of the team will follow.
I was going to bring up a story about coming unprepared to the difference between being vulnerable and saying, I'm not quite here yet, or like, these are some of the mistakes, and then just blatantly not being prepared for quarterly pulses. We
Did you get a little butt kicking from your implementer there, Ryan?
I sure did. I got pulled aside and a nice long email the day after about the performance of our session.
And rightly so, probably, right? It's a big investment of your time and money.
Yes.
Right.
No, right. The best, what I have found is that the best implementers are 100% unfiltered when it comes to feedback for the visionary or the visionary integrator combo. Like that was one of the benefits that I really saw in this as well. So like, yes, it's a framework. Yes, it gets the team aligned. It provides accountability. It gets everybody like speaking the same language throughout the organization. But the other thing that it really did for me is provide almost a mentor for me, a second or third person that could look inside of the organization and say like, hey, I'm seeing the same things you are seeing, and like you need to make some adjustments at this point. So yes. Did you self-implement back in 2014, or did you go and get an implementer?
We did, but I didn't even know there were implementers. So what's funny is I just thought there was this great book traction. I didn't even know there was a website. You know, I was so excited about the book. That's my 7 quick start. Like, I'm not going to even investigate this. Had not even barely finished chapter 1, and I bought a copy for everybody on my team. And I'm like, this is what we're doing. And I just marched us through chapter by chapter. So it took us much longer to implement that well, because that's not even the right order to do it. And Gino doesn't tell you that until chapter 10 in the book, till you're done. He says, oh, hey, if you're going to try this on your own, don't do it in the order I wrote this book. Well, maybe put that at the beginning of the book, just as a thought. So anywho, right, we just went all in. Fortunately, you know, I had a really healthy team from a team health standpoint, which helped with that. Otherwise, that I think is a lot of times where self-implementers really struggle. The other place where I know now, and we did this, and then I did dive into Basecamp, and I understood, and I went and actually got certified and cleaned up the work that we had already done, right, for that company before I exited that, and stayed on as their implementer for a year, even after I left. But what I see when folks do this on their own is usually there's a lack of discipline and accountability. Somebody's just not willing to call out the elephant, the BS, whatever in the room. Everybody's got their own agenda. The implementer, our only agenda is for the organization. We're on the team of the company. What is best for the company? And we just are constantly beating that drum. The other thing, and I can tell, and I would say this is pretty accurate every time I've done it. When I take a look at a VTO, that Vision Traction Organizer, I can tell you with a high level of confidence whether or not this company is self-implementing or not, because there's just too much in it. We have a hard time stripping away the things that aren't necessary. We have a hard time we want everything to be important. And we don't have anybody really challenging us to fight for everything that's in there, like your implementer will do. And so it's just crowded is a great way to say that. And my new favorite analogy for helping people understand this is think about any time you've ever packed for a trip. It's way easier to overpack for a trip and just put a lot of stuff in there. And you maybe are lucky if you wear 20% of what you brought. It doesn't take a lot of time or effort to pack that way. But to pack well so that you wear the vast majority of everything, you don't have anything extra that you don't need, takes a lot more work. And you have to keep pulling stuff out, right? And so we as the implementer help you to pack really, really well and take just what you really need to have, right? To have the experience that you want instead of all this extra stuff that's just extra baggage and extra weight.
And when you're looking around on VTO and there's all this extra weight, like, do you normally see it in and you know, your response to this could very well be, I see it all over the place, but like, is it 7 to 10 core values?
Yep.
Is
That's one of them.
Is it they went to the Rock Buffet and there's no way that the leadership team is going to be able to get these quarterly things done? For
sure. You know, with all of my clients, I don't have any clients that I started with that have more than 5 core values. Most are about 4 or 5. Some have only 3. It's 6, 7, sometimes 8 for self-implementers. The core focus is usually paragraphs long. I see a myriad of things inside the 10-year target. It's just a list of items, right? Instead of what it should be. Sometimes there's not even a real understanding of what the marketing strategy is about. It's all about them tooting their horns about how awesome they are, but probably haven't really thought about, well, but are these the things that our target market also think are awesome? That and the target market is everyone. I mean, you know, because they don't understand what the point of why we're doing that activity is also, right? The 3-year picture, sometimes there's so many measurables above the line. I'm like, wow, that's like you've got 6 measurables, 8 measurables up there in addition to your revenue and your profit. And then just a litany of paragraph style goals in there, in there. What does it look like? Part of it. Or just way too many things. Like, we got 25 things in our list of 5 to 15. So that's it's those types of things. It absolutely rocks. Sometimes there's either nothing on the issues list because they don't understand how to use that issues list on the VTO or what it's there for. So it's just a lot of, and you look at their L10s and they've got to-dos on there that are 4 weeks old. There's just a lot going on there. There's just a lot going on.
I would say you would be proud of us and the way that we're operating. I have because we used to work with an implementer,
Right.
I have a slight hands up, but I think you still would be disappointed with our 3-year picture because there are a bunch of things in there. We did we closed our eyes and then we said them out loud and then we believed in them. But we do have quite a few. Yeah, I get it. And, it's interesting, the core values, and we fell into this trap. I remember my first company, we had 10 core values and they were all listed and we had definitions for all of them. And we
Wow.
expected everybody to understand these. And in the Navy, it's honor, courage, commitment. It's 3 things. There's no long 4-paragraph definitions for all of these things. It's honor, courage, commitment. And here's what it means to the Navy. Here's what it should mean to you. You're in or you're out. And it's interesting because I used to look at the Navy and as this monolithic organization that didn't know anything. And I was just a cog in the wheel. And I look back on it now, I'm still sort of in, but I look at it now and I think to myself, over 200 years, like they've figured out some things. One curiosity question. When you look at, this is something that I've struggled with in the past is, annual targets. And so when you look at measurables, 3 to, I think, well, right now it's 3, but let's call it like 5 to 7 things that we're looking at on a weekly basis. You may agree or disagree with that. The problem that I have found is like the things that we're looking at on a monthly, quarterly and annual basis, like we've always just had too much stuff and it didn't funnel nicely in from the weeklies. Like what do you see that works really well when people are showing up for a quarterly? Like, are they looking at 5 to 7 different things, or is there just like 3 things the company's trying to hit?
So you're talking about the measurables on the VTO, right? Because those are different than the measurables on a scorecard, which is frustrating to me, but I didn't create the term. So I'm just, there we go. I always feel like I have to, these measurables are different than these measurables. Sorry, those terms mean something different here. It's a lot of times one feeds the other. I do feel like less is more there. Every company's going to do what every company's going to do. I do have a couple of organizations that have 3 or 4 measurables because they feel like they want to include everyone. So for a little bit of context, the measurables on the VTO are there to help everybody else outside the leadership team understand the size and scope of where you're headed. So the profit and the revenue numbers, everybody on the leadership team they understand those numbers in a way that a lot of times everybody else in the organization doesn't really. So looking at the 3-year picture and you have this revenue and this profit number up there might not help them understand, what that looks like, what kind of business you're going to look like in 3 years or in 1 year. So that measurable or measurables are the things designed to help everybody else get their arms around the size and scope of what you're trying to do. That's the intention of what that is meant to do up there. So if you're a widget maker, it's how many widgets. So I have worked with a lot of auto groups. Some of them just they've got units sold and they've got service hours, right? Because that covers the front and the back end of the house, right? Units sold and service hours. And then I have a few that feel like they really want to incorporate everyone. So they end up with the F&I dollars, which is your finance department, the financing of the vehicle, right? To the consumer side. And then parts, which falls under right? Even though both of those actually tie into those other numbers. So then they end up with those 4. And I'm like, all right. And then occasionally now they also want to make sure that they've got CSI, which is their customer service index. And they end up just putting a lot of these things that they're tracking anyway. And so I'm always making people fight for things, but I make suggestions. It's your business. You ultimately are going to make those decisions in your business. I just make you fight for them. So if you want to add more, you really got to fight for them and make sure that we're not adding complexity just to add complexity. Because are we still paying attention to these things? Same with our weekly scorecard in activities. This is not the the junk drawer in your kitchen to put every single thing that we want to look at. But that's what some teams want to do. They just, oh, that's a good thing for the score. Let's put that on the scorecard. Let's put that on the scorecard. They want to put everything on the scorecard. Well, you're a leader in an organization. So there's probably a lot of things that you should be tracking and paying attention to. That doesn't make it a candidate for your weekly scorecard. It's your job to pay attention to some of these reports. What goes on the scorecard are meant to give us a view into the future, to help us predict what we can expect from our organization over the next month or the next quarter. These are things that are kind of like the non-negotiables that, man, we got to make sure that these things are being done at this rate, this frequency, this percentage, whatever it is that we're measuring each and every week in order for our business to land where we need it to land. And we're actually willing to take action on one of these things if it's not on track. We're willing to actually do something about it and go out and get it solved. And a lot of times we're just looking at data where it's just good to know data, but we're not going to do anything about it.
I'm sure this is in the implementer playbook, and it was one of the exercises that we ran, and it was all about like, the visionary, the integrator, or just the visionary. Like you're on a beach, and you can only look at these metrics. And I've heard it time and time again. But it makes so much sense. And we struggled with that at Hunt to Killer quite a bit. We wanted to put in things like conversion rate and like email click through and all of these different things. And like, yes, like these are very important metrics, but these are metrics that I, as a leader inside the organization, expect that somebody else is looking at on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. And all I want to see is the result of those like 3 to 5 things. I want to see what that looks like on a weekly basis to know if we have issues with those other 3 things that those individuals are tracking. So,
maybe those are on the marketing scorecard, right? So things get a lot more tactical as we push down, like who's actually doing the work, who's actually accountable for those numbers. That's where that number should land. And as much as possible, we want those to be activities. It's a lot easier to hold people to account for an activity that they either did or didn't do than for, let's just hope this works out for us this week and that this happened. It's a lot easier to hold people to account on how many phone calls did you make this week, versus how many people walked into our store this week. So the more we can get ahead of what I find, Ryan, is that we're so accustomed in business in particular into looking at the lagging indicators and to looking at the P&L, that's the stuff that we pay attention to. And very often, most of our business owners and leaders actually aren't really clear on what levers they can pull that will impact those end result numbers. The scorecard is designed to help us get really great clarity on what are these activities. And if we don't know, we need to figure that out. And if we have all of these activities, maybe it's time to start playing with some lever pulling. What happens if we do something to this one? Is that going to, so that we know which of these levers has the greatest impact? And those are the things that we want on our scorecard.
I've learned so much already, by the way. This is going to be a podcast or an episode that I listen to over and over again. One of the things that I just pieced together as you were talking through that is like, it's like they all kind of build on each other. Like let's say it's the marketing, like those 5 to 7 KPIs build into 1 or 2 of the KPIs the scorecard or the measurables in the L10. And then, out of those 7, they build into the one that's on the quarterly, and they're all building on each other to get us to this place of, whatever our 10-year target is or whatever that big thing.
Right. We have line of sight into where we start. What's the first stage of this, this funnel? If we're talking about marketing, right? There's a lot of steps along the way. Some of them are impactful and some of them are not. And we just have to figure out which ones are and how to do them the right and best way so that we can maximize the impact and play with those lever pullings, right? That's your job kind of as leaders when you aren't really sure, is to get a handle on that. And so you might have a few extra things on your scorecard while you're testing stuff out. You might not really know what it looks like, but if you're greedy all the time and you're not getting the result you want, then it maybe isn't the right lever, or the wrong person is pulling that lever because they're not doing it right. There's just a lot to unpack there. And the better you can get at that and dial that in, that's when you actually have a predictable business. And you feel confident that if my scorecard is 80% green all the time, I am going to hit those numbers that I set up on my BTO. That 1-year plan is going to come to fruition because my scorecard told me it was. If your scorecard doesn't tell you that, something's wrong.
Okay, so someone just listened to this whole episode and they're like, I need to meet this person. She needs to be my implementer. Where can they find you?
Well, there should probably be a link here, but EOSworldwide.com, right? And you do that /Cheri-Kuhn, it'll take you right to my microsite. But I'm pretty easy to find in a lot of places on LinkedIn, but I think EOS Worldwide is the easiest, or they can just email me directly if you just want to email me at cheri.kuhn@eosworldwide.com. Happy to take that. I don't travel for clients anymore, so you would pretty much need to be here in the Pacific Northwest. However, as a coach, I'm a coach at EOS. I actually sit on the implementer development team, so I help create programming and coaching for other implementers in our community. I know a lot of implementers, so you could still reach out to me and I could help align you with somebody that I think would be a great fit for you in the community that you are in. I'm also more than happy to do that. Or just answer questions. Help first, one of our core values. So
there it is. You're the coaches of coaches. Thank you so much for coming on. I wasn't kidding about I will be listening to this, hopefully with myself on mute and hopefully with you very loud. But thank you so much for coming on. And maybe we can grab drinks here in a couple weeks because I'll be back home.
Yes, when you come back.
Confessions of an EOS Implementer is brought to you by Talent Harbor. To find out more about Talent Harbor and our fractional services and talent search solutions for businesses that operate on EOS, visit talentharbor.com. And then make sure to search for EOS Implementer in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And on behalf of the team here at Talent Harbor, thanks for listening.